As of January 2023, consumer debt is at an all-time high. Credit card usage is at an all-time high. Personal saving rates are at an all-time low. And this makes sense, right? Because car payments are suddenly $700 on average.
Car payments.
Rent is up like crazy. Groceries are super expensive. Housing prices, I think that says enough. And even eggs are suddenly $10. And yet, despite that, the Costco hot dog is still only $1.50. And I say that because I think there's hope. If you clicked on this video, I'm imagining that you're probably thinking about becoming debt-free, or you're somewhere in the middle of that journey and you need some motivation. For those of you that are thinking about becoming debt-free, I want you to imagine a life without credit card payments, without car payments, without student loan payments, which that last one's not too hard to imagine because I don't think we've had to make payments for the last few years. But if you can imagine not having any of those payments, credit cards, car loans, or anything like that, what does that make you feel like? I can imagine you probably feel some sense of peace. 3 years ago, shortly after New Year's, that's exactly what I imagined. And so I started on the journey of becoming debt-free. And then after 18 months of hard work and sacrifice and paying off $70,000, my wife and I had accomplished our goal and we became debt-free. So in this video, what I wanted to do is share with you guys my journey with debt, how I accumulated it, how I got rid of it, but more importantly, what my key takeaways were, and then obviously, hopefully, some tips for you guys that if you're going through the same journey. I know that for me personally, when I was working through my 18 months of paying off debt, it was stories like this that kind of kept me motivated. Hopefully, there's one person out there watching this that it resonates with, and that can kind of convince you to keep going or convince you to start if you're thinking about paying off debt. A couple quick disclaimers before I get started. My $70,000 of debt was made up of student loans, car payments, credit card payments, and then obviously a little bit of medical debt. But it's important for me to say that none of the debt that I paid was paid off using an inheritance. I didn't move in with my parents, thank God, and I didn't have to sell a liver. And I also didn't strike it rich with crypto, although I wish I had. $70,000 that my wife and I paid off was paid off primarily just by some hard work, that good old sweat equity. So in order for you to understand how I got to $70,000 in debt, let me first give you some context. Now, growing up, I would say that my story was very normal. A middle-class family from the suburbs, and I remember times when money was tight, but I also remember times when we had money to go to cool vacations. Money wasn't really discussed around the dinner table, but my parents also did a good job of helping me open my first bank account when I was 16. But it was when I entered my adult years, aka college, that I began to accumulate my first amounts of debt. After a year out of state, I learned that all my in-state full-ride scholarships would no longer exist because I wasn't a direct high school transfer. But despite that, I did choose the cheaper alternative. I was smart at the time and went to a community college because it was cheaper, and I paid for my associate's degree all in full, so I graduated with an associate's degree debt-free. But it was when I went for my bachelor's degree at university that I accumulated my first amount of debt. This amounted about $20,000 in student loans, with some of it being on my credit card. But honestly, it wasn't too bad for a bachelor's degree, but it was still $20,000 in debt. It was also during this time that I met my soon-to-be wife, and despite both of us being in college and being young, I decided that I would propose. And how did I pay for the engagement ring? Well, none other than the help of a tax return and a credit card. But it did end up being worth it because 3 months after I graduated, we did get married, and with that, our bank accounts were conjoined. And so with my wife still being in college, our student loans were combined, and now we're up to $50,000 in debt. Now in their 4th year of marriage, my wife and I decided to pack up our belongings and move to the Pacific Northwest. And with that, fed in with the mold, we traded our paid off beater vehicles and bought ourselves a new beloved orange Subaru. And when we shot for our car, I remember my mentality at the time was, how much of a payment can I afford on this vehicle rather than how much of a car I can afford? So what I want to point out there is that basically during my 20s, my mentality was really something of like a broke mindset. I was finally starting to make really good money, and instead of saving that or paying off debt, I just found ways that I could spend that money. It seemed like the more I earned, the more I spent. And this type of behavior does have a title. It's called lifestyle inflation, and I definitely fell victim to lifestyle inflation. Believing that because I had a good salary, I deserved the vacations to Hawaii, all funded by our credit card. And this is really where we hit the end of our rope with financed phones, car payments, student loan payments, credit card payments. We were ready to throw up the white flag. At the ripe age of 29, my wife and I had our so-called come to Jesus moment with our finances. Credit card was maxed out, there wasn't an extra penny to our budget, and I was funding Taco Tuesdays on a credit card. Now, despite my income and having a really good career for my age, I was stressed out and I was broke. But perhaps the worst part of all of it was that really my wife didn't even know about the amount of debt that was weighing on our shoulders. Until one day when she logged into our credit card account and saw the amount, and she called me and she simply said, "I think we should pay this off." And if I'm honest, my wife knowing about the amount of debt that we were in was honestly a huge sigh of relief for me. Just having it out of the bag, just letting it be known was kind of the first step in getting all of this started. So it was shortly after New Year's, and my wife and I came together and decided that it would be our goal for the year to become debt-free, and the year was 2020. Yeah, that 2020. So love 'em or hate 'em, wherever you land on the fence, I do have to give credit where credit's due. Dave Ramsey. I attribute a lot of me getting out of debt to Dave Ramsey. Now I know, as a business major, and I was super critical of Dave Ramsey, good debts versus bad debts and high interest rate debts and all this stuff. It wasn't lost on me, but the reason I was super critical was because deep down I knew when it came to debt, he was right. I was the one who was $70,000 in debt, pretending that I was smarter than the king of debt-free living himself. So that leads me to the first step, which was humility. The hardest part of all of this was admitting that I was wrong. Me, the business major, super budgeter, had a decent understanding of money, was actually wrong with how I was managing my finances. Now, once this realization hit, I knew that it was time for me to completely devote myself and lean in to somebody else's plan. And it's just like with fitness, you can go to the gym for years and not get any bigger. And it's not until you get with like a professional trainer that you realize your form sucks and that maybe Campbell's beef stew isn't a healthy meal. I actually thought that at one point in my life. As far as paying off the debt itself, if you remember, we started our journey in January of 2020, and then a few months later, the entire way of living would be kind of flipped on its head. Now, this actually worked to our benefit because with movie theaters and concerts and travel and everything shut down, I didn't really feel like we were missing out on a whole lot. Now, we still had to sacrifice and we had to say no to things that we wanted to do. For 18 months, we were on a super strict budget. We didn't go on vacation, we didn't buy new clothes, and we didn't really eat out. We took on extra jobs and just looked for any way to make extra income to kind of throw at the debt. We weren't perfect, but we were really trying our all. Now, if what I'm saying makes you feel a little anxious in the thought of saying no to all those things and no to Taco Tuesday makes you feel a little weird, well, that brings me to takeaway point number 2. Now, on day one, your mountain of debt and the thought of living on a super strict budget for the next couple of years or however long is probably gonna make your skin crawl. But once you get into the motion of it and you pay off that first loan, that first small loan, you'll feel that sense of motivation to keep going. That perspective will compound and you'll just wanna keep going. Now, looking back on my 18 months, honestly, at the beginning, it felt like it was gonna be forever. But looking back, it really doesn't seem like it was that long. Perspective is also crucial in knowing your why. You've probably heard this a million times, Zig Ziglar's example of know your why, but just like with any goal, you have to know why you're doing it. If getting out of debt is something that you think, oh, I should just probably do this, it might not happen for you. Now, I say that because that was me for most of my 20s. It wasn't until I got to that I can't live like this anymore that I had found my why, and that's when I changed. Now, for me, my why also changed 15 months into my journey because my wife and I found out that we were expecting our first child. And I remember when my wife and I would take walks and just talk about what it would be like to raise our kid in a household that didn't utilize debt, didn't know what debt was, and that I could raise my child to know what it meant to live below their means and to truly use money as a tool. But all of that would only happen if I became debt-free first. Now, the last takeaway for me was that the feeling of being debt-free didn't happen at the very end when I completed paying off all the debt. It actually happened somewhere in the middle. For me, I started feeling debt-free when I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I felt debt-free when I finally had control over my finances. I really felt debt-free when I was no longer stressed about money, despite at the time still having some debt. Feeling debt-free didn't happen on the last day, rather it happened slowly and it built up starting from day one. So those were my 3 key takeaways, but for those of you that are just starting out, or if you're in the middle and you just want some tips, let me give you a few tips. So first, if you haven't done so already, I really recommend that you write down all the debts that you have, just list them out and then total it all together and see what it is. If you're married, it's super important that you come together with your spouse and be aligned on this goal. It's not gonna be all roses. It certainly wasn't for me in the beginning. What I will say is that looking back, it was one of the best things that we did for our marriage and was maybe one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. Now, second, I would recommend that you just start saying it out loud that you're paying off debt or that you're in debt. Even if it's just $1,000 that you want to pay off, just say it out loud. The next time that you go get coffee with friends and you decide to skip out because you'd rather use that money towards paying off your debt, don't just say like, oh, I already had a coffee this morning. Tell them why. Tell them, hey, I'm paying off debt. I can't afford this coffee right now. It's probably going to feel pretty weird to say that. You know, I think that when it came to debt, it felt like a taboo subject, but it goes back to the idea of humility. And so as I said it, I was really surprised with how many people were really supportive, or the amount of people that were like in a similar situation, or, you know, just encouraged us to keep going. Now, third, and this is probably the most important tip that I'll share with you, you have to fall in love with the process of paying off debt. I actually look back on those 18 months pretty fondly. It was a season where I learned a lot. I grew a lot as a person. So like I said, you just have to fall in love with the process and find ways to maybe distract yourself. So I would recommend starting a YouTube channel, but I'll save that for another video. Now, if you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you watching it all the way. You know, feel free to hit subscribe if you haven't already. But in this video, I didn't go into detail on the exact steps for creating a budget or what the steps are exactly for paying off debt. Simply, my goal was to share my story and hopefully motivate somebody who is out there who is in the middle of it or thinking about paying off the debt. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.